The last thing you'd expect on a Tuesday night is for your life to shatter and reform in the span of a single hour. For Leona Reyes, Tuesday was the day her little brother's medical bills became a mountain she could no longer climb. It was the day the rain fell so hard it felt like the sky was crying with her. And it was the day a man so broken he couldn't stand stumbled into her world reeking of whiskey and $100 billion fortune. She thought she was just helping a drunk to his car. She had no idea she was escorting her destiny, and that his chauffeur would soon return with an offer that would test the very limits of her soul. The rain over downtown Portland was biblical. It fell in relentless, slanting sheets, turning the streets into fractured mirrors of neon and taillights. Inside the opulent warmth of Aria, an Italian restaurant, where a single plate of pasta cost more than Leona Reyes's weekly groceries, the storm was a distant romantic murmur. For Leona, it was the sound of her anxiety. The later her shift ran, the more expensive the cab ride home would be, and every dollar was a drop of blood for her family. She moved between tables with an efficiency born of desperation, her smile practiced and weary. She was a ghost in this world of tailored suits and silk dresses, refilling glasses of Barolo, describing the truffle-infused specials she could never afford to taste. Her mind wasn't on the Parmesan shavings or the decanting of wine. It was on the letter that had arrived that morning from Pacific pediatric specialists. The words, experimental treatment, significant out-of-pocket costs, and final notice swirled in her head, a more violent storm than the one outside. Her brother Leo was 9. He was a bright, funny kid who loved drawing superheroes, but his lungs were betraying him, a rare and aggressive form of cystic fibrosis, tightening its grip with each passing month. Leona at 24 was his primary caregiver, his mother, his father, and his only hope all rolled into one, since their parents had passed away in a car accident 5 years ago. Hope, however, was becoming a luxury. It was nearing closing time when he came in. He didn't walk so much as lurch, a tall figure silhouetted against the deluge. The maître d' perpetually pinched man named Robert intercepted him with practiced disdain. "Sir, I'm afraid we're about to close the kitchen." The man looked up, and even from across the room, Leona could see the chilling emptiness in his eyes. They were a startlingly pale grey, like a winter sky, but they were unfocused, clouded by grief and an astonishing amount of expensive liquor. His dark hair was soaked and dishevelled, and his custom-tailored suit, which probably cost more than her car, was rumpled and damp. "One drink." The man slurred his voice, a low gravel. He didn't sound demanding, just hollow. He fumbled for his wallet, pulling out a thick wad of cash and dropping it onto the maître d's stand. "For your trouble." Robert's professional sneer melted away. "Of course, sir. Right this way." He was seated at a small, isolated table in Leona's section. She approached cautiously. "What can I get for you, sir?" He stared at the rain-streaked window, not at her. "Scotch. Whatever's oldest." He tossed a platinum credit card onto the table. The name embossed on it read, Donovan Knight. Leona's breath hitched. She wasn't an expert on the city's elite, but even she knew that name. Knight Industries was a titan of technology, and aerospace a global behemoth. Donovan Knight was its enigmatic king, a figure spoken of in hushed, reverent tones in the financial pages. He was also a recluse, rarely seen since a tragedy a few years back. The tabloids had been merciless, talking about his wife and young daughter. She brought him the drink, a 30-year-old Macallan that cost $400 a glass. He didn't seem to notice. He just stared out the window, his jaw tight, his knuckles white around the glass. He ordered another, and then a third. Leona watched him, her heart aching, with a strange, unwelcome empathy. She knew that look. It was the look of someone drowning on dry land. Finally, Robert gave her the signal. "We're closing, Leona. Get him out of here." She approached the table gently. "Mr. Knight, sir, we're closing now. Can I call you a car?" He finally turned his gaze on her, and the raw pain in his eyes was so potent it felt like a physical blow. "A car," he echoed, his voice thick with a sarcasm that didn't quite mask the despair. "Yes, a car to take me away." He tried to stand, but his legs betrayed him. He swayed, and Leona, acting on pure instinct, rushed forward and caught his arm. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and misery. "Whoa, easy there," she said, her voice soft. The scent of rain, expensive cologne, and even more expensive scotch enveloped her. "Let me help you." He didn't protest. He leaned on her, his breathing ragged. She was struck by how strangely intimate it felt, this powerful broken man relying on her, a complete stranger. She guided him through the empty restaurant, past the disapproving stare of Robert. Outside, the rain was a cold shock. "Where's your car, Mr. Knight?" He gestured vaguely down the street. "Black sedan. Driver's name is Walter." She half carried, half dragged him down the slick sidewalk. The wind whipped her thin uniform, chilling her to the bone. They found the car, a magnificent Bentley Mulsanne, parked a block away. The chauffeur, an older man with a kind, worried face, immediately got out and opened the door. "Mr. Knight, I was getting concerned." "He's all right," Leona said, helping the chauffeur get Donovan into the plush leather back seat. "Just had a bit too much to drink." Donovan slumped against the seat, his eyes closed. As she pulled back, her hand brushed against his suit cuff, and she felt something hard and metallic press into her palm. She looked down. It was a cufflink, a simple, elegant platinum square with a small, dark blue sapphire at its center. It must have come loose in the struggle. "Sir, you dropped this," she said, holding it out. His eyes fluttered open. He stared at the cufflink in her hand, and his face contorted with a fresh wave of pain. He didn't take it. "Keep it," he rasped, his voice cracking. "It's worthless." He turned his head away, a clear dismissal. The chauffeur Walter gave her a look of profound pity and gratitude. "Thank you, miss. Truly. Not many people would have done that." He closed the door and the Bentley pulled away from the curb, its engine a low, powerful hum that was quickly swallowed by the storm. Leona stood on the sidewalk, soaked to the skin, clutching a platinum and sapphire cufflink. "Worthless," he'd said. She knew with a sinking feeling that it was probably worth enough to cover Leo's medication for a year. But it felt wrong, like holding a piece of someone's soul. Shivering, she slipped it into her pocket, turned her face against the wind, and began the long, wet walk to the bus stop. The day after the storm was deceptively bright. The Portland sky was scrubbed clean, and the sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of Leona's neighborhood. The contrast between the city's renewed gleam and the dingy, peeling paint of her two-bedroom apartment building was stark. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the low, constant hum of Leo's nebulizer. Leona was exhausted. She'd gotten home after 2 a.m., her uniform clinging to her like a second skin. She had slept for 4 hours before Leo's coughing fit had woken her. Now sitting at their small kitchen table, she juggled bills and online pharmacy portals, the numbers blurring into an insurmountable wall of debt. The cufflink sat on the table beside her, glinting in the morning light. It felt like a judgment. "What's that?" Leo asked, padding into the kitchen. He was small for his age, with wide, intelligent eyes that saw far too much. He pointed a thin finger at the piece of jewelry. It's pretty. Something I found. Leona lied, her heart twisting. Just a piece of glass. She couldn't bring herself to sell it. It felt like profiting from a man's anguish. It was his, and no matter how desperate she was, that felt like a line she couldn't cross. She pushed it aside and focused on making Leo's breakfast, the familiar routine, a small anchor in her sea of troubles. The rest of the day was a blur of chores, medication schedules, and a fruitless phone call with the insurance company that left her feeling hollowed out and furious. By late afternoon, she was mentally composing her resignation letter to Aria, wondering if she could find a second or even a third job. Maybe a 24-hour diner or a cleaning service. Anything. That's when she saw it through the window. A Bentley Mulsanne, the same one from the night before, was parked at the curb in front of her building. It was so out of place in her neighborhood of rusted pickups and decades-old sedans that it looked like it had been photoshopped into the scene. Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. He couldn't be here. Why would he be here? The driver's door opened, and the chauffeur Walter stepped out. He was dressed in a crisp black suit and looked just as uncomfortable as his car did. He checked a piece of paper, then looked up at her building, his gaze moving from window to window. Leona froze. Was he here for the cufflink? Did Knight think she had stolen it? Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She imagined police accusations, losing her job, and the catastrophic effect that would have on Leo. She heard a polite, firm knock on her apartment door. "Leona, who's that?" Leo called from his room where he was sketching. "Just a moment, sweetie." She called back, her voice tight. She took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it a crack. Walter stood there, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Miss Reyes, Leona Reyes?" "Yes." She managed her hand, gripping the doorknob so tightly her knuckles were white. "My name is Walter Jennings. I'm Mr. Knight's personal driver. I believe you assisted him last night." He left this," she said, quickly, turning to grab the cufflink from the table. "I was going to try and return it. I didn't steal it, I swear." Walter held up a hand, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Mr. Knight is not concerned about the cufflink, miss. In fact, he instructed me to tell you to keep it. I am here for another reason." He held out a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with a stylized K. It was heavy, made of expensive cardstock. "Mr. Knight has sent me with an offer for you. He requests a meeting. He has instructed me to wait and chauffeur you to his office, should you accept." Leona stared at the envelope, then back at Walter's impassive face. An offer. What kind of offer could a man like Donovan Knight possibly have for her? A reward for helping him. A check for a few $100s that seemed too simple, too straightforward for an emissary in a Bentley. I don't understand," she stammered. "The details are within the envelope, Miss Reyes," Walter said patiently. "It is a business proposition, and I am authorized to add that it is of a time-sensitive and highly lucrative nature." Her mind reeled. A business proposition? She was a waitress. Her only assets were debt and exhaustion. It made no sense. She took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. The paper felt cool and smooth against her skin. "Can I have a moment to read this?" "Of course, miss. I will wait by the car." He gave a slight bow and retreated down the hallway. Leona closed the door, her back pressing against it, as if to hold the strange new reality at bay. She tore open the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a friendly note. It was a formal, non-disclosure agreement. It stated that in exchange for considering a proposal from Mr. Donovan Knight, she agreed to absolute confidentiality under penalty of a lawsuit so severe it made her dizzy just reading the number of zeros. Below the terrifying legal jargon was a single typed line. Proposal A, 6-month contractual engagement. Compensation $2,000, $2 million plus all related expenses, and the immediate settlement of outstanding medical liabilities. Leona read the line again, and again. The words seemed to warp and shimmer. $2 million. It wasn't a real number. It was a fantasy, a lottery prize, a dream you wake up from, laughing at the absurdity. Settlement of outstanding medical liabilities. Those words were not a dream. They were a lifeline. They were Leo's future. They were the experimental treatment, the best doctors, a life free from the constant shadow of sickness. But what was a contractual engagement? The phrase was sterile, corporate, and deeply unsettling. It felt cold and transactional. Why her random waitress he had met for 5 minutes while he was blackout drunk? None of it added up. It felt dangerous, like a trick, a beautiful glittering trap laid just for her. She looked from the paper to the window. Down below, Walter stood patiently beside the gleaming Bentley, a silent sentinel from another world. He was waiting for her answer. She looked towards Leo's room, hearing the soft puffing of his nebulizer, the soundtrack of her life. $2 million. Her heart was hammering a frantic drumbeat of terror and a wild, terrifying flicker of hope. She knew with absolute certainty that if she walked out that door and got into that car, her life would never be the same, and she had no idea if it would be for better or for immeasurably worse. The Knight Industries Tower was a shard of smoked glass and steel that pierced the Portland sky, a monument to power and ambition. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalist design, all white marble soaring ceilings and hushed reverence. People in expensive suits moved with quiet purpose, their footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous space. Leona, dressed in her only presentable outfit, a pair of black slacks, and a simple blue blouse, felt like a stray dog that had wandered into a museum. Walter had been silent and professional during the drive, answering none of her tentative questions. He simply escorted her to a private elevator that bypassed the main floors, ascending with a stomach-lurching speed directly to the penthouse. The doors opened, not into a reception area, but directly into Donovan Knight's office. The room was immense, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a godlike view of the city sprawling below. Yet the space was cold, almost sterile. The furniture was sleek, black, and uncomfortable looking. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, no sign that a human being actually worked here. It was less an office, and more a mausoleum for a life that had once been. Donovan Knight stood by the window, his back to her. He was sober now. The rumpled, broken man from the restaurant was gone. In his place was a figure of intimidating stillness and control. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, and his hair was impeccably styled. When he turned, his pale grey eyes were sharp, analytical, and utterly devoid of the emotion she had seen 2 nights before. It was like looking at a different person. "Miss Reyes," he said, his voice a cool, level baritone. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to one of the chairs facing his massive obsidian desk. Leona sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Knight," she began, her voice shakier than she wanted, "I received your offer. I don't understand." "The lack of understanding is mutual," he said, moving to sit behind his desk, creating a formidable barrier between them. "I don't understand why, out of a restaurant full of staff, you were the only one who showed a flicker of human decency. You didn't mock me. You didn't try to take advantage of me, and you didn't simply throw me out into the street. You helped me. That makes you an anomaly." He folded his hands on the desk, his gaze intense. I require an anomaly, Miss Reyes. I have a problem, and you have become the unexpected and perhaps ideal solution. He slid a thick leather-bound folder across the desk towards her. This is the full contract. I suggest you read it carefully, though the essence is simple. The board of directors for this company has grown concerned. They see my grief not as a private matter, but as a liability. They see my solitude as instability. There is a faction, led by a particularly predatory rival named Gideon Pierce, that is attempting a hostile takeover, using my perceived emotional fragility as their leverage. He paused, his eyes flickering for a moment, with something that looked like self-loathing. They believe I am broken. I need to prove to them and to our investors that I am not. I need to project an image of stability, of moving forward, of recovery. Leona stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying clarity. And how do I fit into that? You will portray my fiancé, he stated the words, dropping into the silent room like stones. You will accompany me to a number of high-stakes social and corporate events over the next 6 months. You will be seen on my arm. You will smile for the cameras, and you will present the picture of a happy, stable couple. You will be, for all intents and purposes, the woman who healed the broken billionaire. The sheer audacity of it left her speechless. It was insane. It was something out of a trashy novel. Why me? She finally whispered. You could hire an actress. Anyone. An actress has a public history, a trail that can be followed. They are predictable, he countered smoothly. You, Miss Reyes, are perfect. You are a blank slate. You have no public profile. You have a compassionate nature, as you've already proven. Your backstory is sympathetic. A hard-working young woman caring for her sick brother. It's a narrative the press and the public will find believable, even compelling. You are authentic in a way no actress could ever be. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. And most importantly, you have a need. I've taken the liberty of having your situation discreetly investigated. He gestured to another file on his desk. Leo Reyes, age 9, cystic fibrosis, mounting medical bills, denied insurance claims for a new treatment at OHSU. You're working double shifts and you're still drowning. You need a miracle. A cold fury mixed with her fear. He had pried into her life, dissected her desperation, and was now laying it out on his desk like a business plan. So you're buying me, she said, the words tasting like acid. I am offering a mutually beneficial business transaction. He corrected his tone, unwavering. I gain 6 months of stability to secure my company. You gain financial freedom and the best medical care in the world for your brother. The contract stipulates that upon signing a sum of $250,000 will be transferred to an account of your choosing for immediate needs. All of Leo's medical expenses, including the experimental treatment, will be covered directly by a private fund, separate from your compensation. The remainder of the $2 million will be placed in an irrevocable trust for you, payable upon the successful completion of the contract. He had thought of everything. He had anticipated her every pressure point and offered the perfect balm. He wasn't just offering money, he was offering Leo's life. She opened the folder. It was dense with legal clauses, an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, a list of required public appearances, rules of conduct, a strict no fraternization clause that outlined the purely platonic professional nature of their arrangement. There were even clauses about wardrobe public statements and social media. It was a script for a new life. This is crazy, she breathed, looking up at him. This is business, he replied, and it is the best and only offer you will receive. I can provide for your brother in a way you never could. All I ask for in return is your time and your performance." She thought of Leo's wheezing breaths in the middle of the night. She thought of the hopeful look in his doctor's eyes when he'd mentioned the new treatment, a look that had died when he saw Leona's financial records. She thought of the cufflink he'd called worthless, and the casual way he was now offering a sum of money that could rewrite her entire existence. This wasn't a choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between her pride and her brother's future. And for Leona, that was no choice at all. Her hand was trembling as she picked up the pen he had placed beside the contract. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. "Before I sign," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I want to see the funds for Leo's treatment placed in escrow with his primary physician as a co-signer. I want a guarantee that no matter what happens between us, his care is secured." A flicker of surprise, perhaps even respect, crossed Donovan Knight's face. It was the first genuine expression she had seen since he'd turned from the window. "A sensible precaution," he conceded. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Jessica, get my attorney and my financial officer on the line. We are adding a medical escrow addendum to the Reyes contract, immediately." He looked back at Leona, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "Is there anything else?" Leona took a steadying breath, the smell of expensive leather and recycled air filling her lungs. "No," she said. "That's all." She signed her name on the signature line, her simple cursive looking impossibly small and frail beneath the weight of the dense, terrifying text. As she lifted the pen, she felt a profound sense of finality. She had just sold the next 6 months of her life. She had just made a deal with the devil to save an angel. The transformation was dizzyingly swift. One moment, Leona was measuring her life in bus schedules and discounted groceries. The next, she was living in a world dictated by stylists, etiquette coaches, and public relations handlers. The day after she signed the contract, she and Leo were moved from their cramped apartment into a luxurious, fully furnished condominium in the Pearl District, paid for by the Knight Family Trust. It was beautiful, spacious, and felt as alien as a moon base. Leo was ecstatic, mesmerized by the floor-to-ceiling windows and the voice-activated smart home features. Leona felt like she was trespassing in someone else's life. The first deposit appeared in her bank account, as promised, a number so large her banking app seemed to glitch. With trembling hands, she paid off every outstanding medical bill. The relief was so overwhelming, it brought her to her knees, sobbing on the cold marble floor of her new designer kitchen. The weight she had carried for years had vanished, but it was replaced by a new, more complicated burden. The price of this peace was a lie. Her education began immediately. A stern but fair woman named Ms. Dubois taught her which fork to use, how to make meaningless small talk for hours, and how to walk in the murderously high-end heels that a personal shopper had procured for her. She was given a binder thicker than a textbook containing detailed biographies of every major player on the Knight Industries board, their wives, their children, and their business rivals. It was a crash course in becoming a billionaire's fiancé. Her new history was carefully curated by Donovan's PR team. She was a former nursing student who had put her career on hold to care for her brother. She and Donovan had met through a mutual acquaintance and had been dating privately for months, valuing their privacy before deciding to make their relationship public. It was a plausible, heartwarming fiction. The first test came a week later, a charity gala for the Portland Children's Hospital. It was their public debut. Dressed in a sapphire blue gown that shimmered under the light and cost more than her annual salary, Leona felt like a doll being positioned for display. A diamond necklace loaned for the evening felt cold and heavy against her throat. Donovan arrived to pick her up looking impossibly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. He was a perfect stranger. They had barely spoken since the day she signed the contract. Their interactions had been through his army of assistants. "You look acceptable," he said, his eyes giving her a quick, dispassionate appraisal. There was no warmth, no compliment. It was an assessment. "Remember the talking points. We met through mutual friends at a gallery opening. You admire my commitment to technological innovation. I was drawn to your quiet strength. Stay close to me, smile, and defer any business-related questions to me. Is that clear?" "Crystal," she replied, her voice tight. The gala was a glittering nightmare. 100 conversations swirled around her, a cacophony of wealth and influence. Flashbulbs went off like miniature explosions, and Leona forced a smile until her cheeks ached. She clung to Donovan's arm, her scripted lines playing on a loop in her head. He was a masterful actor, placing a seemingly affectionate hand on the small of her back, laughing at the right moments, his public persona, a warm, charming mask that betrayed none of the coldness she knew lay beneath. It was during a brief lull that they were cornered. "Donovan. So the rumors are true." The man who approached was handsome, in a sharp, predatory way, with slicked-back hair and eyes that missed nothing. Leona recognized him instantly from her binder, Gideon Pierce, the rival, the man whose ambition was the entire reason for this charade. "Gideon," Donovan said, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel. His hand tightened imperceptibly on Leona's back. "Good to see you. I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Leona Reyes. Leona, this is Gideon Pierce." "A pleasure, Miss Reyes," Gideon said, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles. His gaze was unnervingly direct. "Donovan has been keeping you a secret. I can't imagine why. A woman like you should be celebrated." "We just wanted to enjoy our privacy for a while," Leona said, her voice sounding surprisingly steady. "Of course." Gideon purred his smile, never reaching his eyes. "Well, it's wonderful to see you looking so well, Donovan. Stable, it's good for business." The word stable was laced with insinuation. Just then, a woman with a severe haircut and eyes the same pale grey as Donovan's joined them. This was Brenda Knight Donovan's older sister, and a high-ranking executive on the board. Her expression was one of undisguised skepticism as she looked Leona up and down. "So this is her," Brenda said, her tone frosty. "Brenda Knight, I'm Donovan's sister." She didn't offer to shake hands. "You've certainly made an impression." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Leona murmured, feeling her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. Brenda's scrutiny was far more unnerving than Gideon's predatory charm. "We'll see," Brenda replied cryptically before turning to her brother. "Donovan, we need to speak with the chairman. Now." She led him away, leaving Leona momentarily alone. Gideon Pierce seized the opportunity. "It must be quite a whirlwind, Miss Reyes," he said, moving a step closer. "To go from, well, wherever you were before to this." "I'm very happy," she said simply. "I'm sure you are," he replied, his voice a low conspiratorial hum. "But a word of advice. Be careful. Donovan is a complicated man. His heart was buried a long time ago. Whatever you think you're getting out of this, make sure the price is worth it." His words were a thinly veiled threat, a clear signal that he didn't believe the story for a second. He was watching her, hunting for a weakness. Donovan returned a few minutes later, his jaw tight. "It's time to go." They left without another word, the ride back to her condominium, thick with unspoken tension. As the car pulled up to the curb, he finally spoke, his gaze fixed on the windshield. "You did well tonight. Your performance was convincing." Performance? The word stung more than she expected. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "Gideon is suspicious, and my sister despises you on principle. You'll have to be better than convincing. You'll have to be perfect." He finally turned to look at her, and for a fleeting instant, the mask slipped. She saw a flash of the exhaustion, the deep, soul-crushing weariness she had seen in the restaurant. "This is a much harder game than you can possibly imagine, Miss Reyes." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply nodded to the driver, and she was left to get out of the car alone. As she walked into the silent, empty lobby of her gilded cage, she realized Gideon Pierce was right. She had no idea if the price was worth it. She had secured Leo's future, but she had a terrifying feeling she had just lost her own. The weeks that followed settled into a bizarre routine. Leona's life was a dichotomy. By day, she was with Leo coordinating his new and promising treatment schedule, reading to him, and watching with a swelling heart as a little bit of color returned to his cheeks. The doctors were optimistic, speaking in terms of management and long-term quality of life instead of a countdown. This was the prize. This was what made everything else bearable. Her evenings and weekends, however, belonged to Donovan Knight. They were a carefully orchestrated series of public appearances, charity auctions, business dinners, a weekend trip to a vineyard for a corporate retreat. Leona played her part, perfecting the adoring smile, the gentle touch on his arm, the soft, deferential tilt of her head. She learned to navigate the treacherous waters of high society, parrying intrusive questions from society wives and dodging the probing inquiries of business reporters. Donovan remained a distant, enigmatic figure. He was the perfect gentleman in public, a phantom in private. Their conversations were purely logistical, focused on schedules and objectives. He never asked about her life, and she didn't dare ask about his. The sterile office where she had signed the contract was a perfect metaphor for their relationship. The cracks in his armor began to show in the most unexpected ways. It happened during the corporate retreat at a lavish Napa Valley estate. They were forced to share a couple's suite, a sprawling set of rooms with a shared living area, but thankfully separate bedrooms. On the second night, after a long dinner, spent charming a group of skeptical Japanese investors, Leona couldn't sleep. She wandered into the suite's living room and found Donovan, standing on the balcony, staring up at the star-dusted sky, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, his tie was loosened, and he looked less like a CEO and more like a man carrying an impossible weight. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle him. He glanced over his shoulder. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "I don't sleep much," he admitted, his voice rough. She walked over and stood beside him, leaning on the railing. The night air was cool and smelled of damp earth and grapes. For a long moment, they stood in silence, not as a billionaire and his hired fiancée, but as two people awake in the middle of the night. "The stars are clearer out here," she said, just to break the silence. She loved the stars. He said, his voice so low, she almost didn't catch it. "My wife, Sarah. She was an astronomer before. He didn't need to finish. She used to drag me out to the middle of nowhere with a telescope. She'd point out constellations, Andromeda, Orion, Cassiopeia. She said it was like looking back in time." Leona's breath caught. It was the first time he had ever mentioned his wife by name. He was speaking about her in the present tense, as if she were still here. "My daughter Lily." He continued, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She was just starting to learn them. She called Cassiopeia the Big W for Walter. He let out a short, harsh sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Leona's heart ached for him, for this raw, unguarded glimpse into the chasm of his loss. All her resentment, all her feelings of being a pawn in his game, melted away in the face of his profound, human grief. My little brother Leo. She found herself saying her own voice, quiet. He loves superheroes. He draws them all the time. He has this whole universe he's created with heroes named after medical equipment. There's Captain Catheter and Dr. Dialysis. His favorite is Nebulon, the master of mist and air. He says Nebulon is fighting the bad guys in his lungs. Donovan turned his head and looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. The mask was gone. His grey eyes were filled with a shared, devastating understanding of what it meant to love someone who was fragile, to fight a battle you weren't sure you could win. "He sounds like a good kid," Donovan said, his voice hoarse. "He is," she whispered. They stood there for another hour, talking. He spoke of Sarah's laugh and Lily's love for yellow rain boots. She spoke of Leo's courage and the terror that had been her constant companion for years. It wasn't a performance. It was a confession, a quiet communion of two souls scarred by loss and responsibility. The invisible wall between them dissolved under the vast, silent canopy of stars. When they finally went to their separate rooms, the air had shifted. The arrangement was still a lie, a business deal. But the foundation it was built on, this shared, fragile humanity, was becoming terrifyingly real. The shift did not go unnoticed. At their next public event, Leona found herself instinctively reaching for his hand, not as a duty, but for reassurance. He in turn would meet her eyes across a crowded room, a silent question passing between them. "Are you okay?" Their staged laughter began to sound genuine. Their public affection no longer felt rehearsed. But as their charade grew more convincing, the world outside their bubble began to push back. Leona was having coffee at a small cafe near her condo, a rare hour to herself, when a man slid into the booth opposite her. He was lean and wiry, with a nervous energy and a desperate look in his eyes. It was Rick, her ex-boyfriend, the one who had walked out 2 years ago, claiming he couldn't handle the stress of Leo's illness. "Leona," he said, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "Wow, look at you, all cleaned up. I've been seeing you in the papers, engaged to Donovan Knight. Who would have thought?" "What do you want, Rick?" she asked, her blood turning to ice. "I'm in a bit of a jam," he said, leaning forward. "Some debts. Nasty people. And then I see my old girl hitting the jackpot. It got me thinking. A guy like Knight, his reputation is everything right. He wouldn't want any unpleasantness from your past coming to light. A messy old boyfriend, for example. It would look so bad." The threat was unmistakable. He was going to blackmail her. "How much?" she asked, her voice hollow. He named a figure that made her sick to her stomach. "Just a little something to get me back on my feet. A finder's fee for leaving you free to land the whale. You get Knight to pay it, and I disappear. Forever." Leona stared at him, at the pathetic, parasitic man he had become. This was the consequence of her deal. The lie was a magnet for vultures. She had escaped one prison of debt, only to find herself in another more dangerous one. And this time, it wasn't just her future on the line. It was Donovan's. The fragile peace Leona had found was shattered by a ghost from her past. Her ex-boyfriend, Rick, cornered her in a cafe, his eyes glinting with a familiar, parasitic greed. He'd seen her in the papers. A guy like Knight, his reputation is everything. Rick had sneered, laying out his demand for blackmail money. He wouldn't want any unpleasantness from your past coming to light. The threat left Leona feeling tainted and terrified. She couldn't tell Donovan, fearing it would confirm his worst assumptions about her and shatter the genuine connection that had begun to form between them. Her anxiety was a palpable thing, making her distracted and jumpy. Donovan noticed the shift, but she brushed off his concerned questions with lies about being tired. The pressure intensified when Donovan's sister Brenda summoned her to a sterile conference room at Knight Industries. Brenda's words were like shards of ice. "I don't know what your game is, but I see right through it," she said, her grey eyes unforgiving. "My brother is vulnerable. For you to prey on that is monstrous. I'm warning you, if you hurt him, or if this charade damages his reputation, I will personally see to it that you are left with nothing. I will bury you." Leona felt trapped, attacked by both her past and her present. The dam finally broke that evening. She entered the living room of her condo to find Donovan staring at a tablet, his face a mask of cold fury. He turned the screen towards her. It was the photo Rick had threatened her with, a picture of them from years ago, attached to an anonymous email. The message was clear. "The fiancé has a past. How much is it worth to you to keep it there? Donovan, I can explain." She began, her voice trembling. "Can you?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The warmth that had grown between them vanished, replaced by the icy CEO she'd first met. "Who is he? And why didn't you tell me?" "My ex-boyfriend," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "He's blackmailing me. I was going to handle it." "Handle it?" He scoffed, the sound sharp and cruel. "By paying him off with my money, this is the exact liability I have been working to avoid. This is a weakness Gideon Pierce could drive a truck through." "Do you have any idea what is at stake?" "I know what's at stake," she retorted, her fear finally erupting into anger. "You think I don't? You see a business liability, a risk to your company. I see the only thing that matters to me in the world, my brother's life. I took this deal to save him, not to play corporate games." Her raw, desperate honesty silenced him. They stood in the opulent room, their carefully constructed lie now a battlefield between them. Donovan looked from her tear-streaked face to the tablet in his hand. He was at a crossroads. The logical, sensible move was to end the contract, pay her off, and contain the damage. It would be the smart thing to do. Or he could trust her. He was silent for a full minute that stretched into an eternity. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the icy fury was gone, replaced by a weary resolve. "Give me his name," he said, his voice low and firm. "What? Your ex-boyfriend? His name." She whispered it, and Donovan immediately sent a brief clinical message to his head of security. "Find Rick Peterson. Neutralize threat. Utmost discretion." He put the phone away and met her gaze. "This is my problem now, Leona," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was something more important, a choice. He was choosing to stand with her. From now on, no more secrets, no matter how ugly. If we're going to survive this, I need to know everything. "Agreed." "Agreed," she whispered, a wave of relief washing over her. Just then his phone buzzed. It was a text from his sister. He read it, his expression grim, and showed her the screen. "Gideon is making a move. He's called an emergency board meeting for the night of the Foundation Gala. He's claiming to have information that will prove your instability once and for all. Be ready for war." The threats were no longer separate. Rick's blackmail, Brenda's distrust, and Gideon's corporate scheming were converging into a perfect storm. It was all coming to a head at the gala, and they would be standing at the absolute center of it. The night of the Knight Industries Foundation Gala was less a celebration and more a final battlefield. held in the grand ballroom of the Portland Art Museum. It was the stage Gideon Pierce had chosen for his final move. The emergency board meeting was the next morning, and he intended to use the gala to publicly fracture Donovan's image. Leona felt a strange calm. This was no longer just about a contract. It was about protecting the man who had shown her a fragile, unexpected kindness. As they entered, Gideon found them, his smile sharp and predatory. "Enjoying your last night of peace," he purred. "The only thing ending tonight is your pathetic attempt to take my company." Donovan replied, his voice lethally calm. Gideon chuckled, angling his phone screen towards them. It showed the old photo of Leona and Rick. "I thought I'd give the board a preview. A struggling waitress, a deadbeat ex-boyfriend. It paints a very different picture of your fairy tale romance. It almost looks transactional." Leona met his gaze without flinching. "An old photo is your bombshell, Gideon. You're more pathetic than I thought." Her defiance surprised him, but he simply smirked and melted back into the crowd. Later, as Donovan was about to give the keynote address, the world tilted. Walter the chauffeur appeared at her side, his face grim. "Miss Reyes, it's your brother's doctor on the line. He said it's an emergency." Ice flooded Leona's veins. The doctor's voice on the phone was urgent, a severe reaction, oxygen levels dropping, a crisis. The gala, Gideon, the contract. It all vanished. There was only Leo. She pushed through the crowd just as the MC announced Donovan's name. "Donovan!" she cried, grabbing his arm. He saw the pure terror in her eyes. "It's Leo," she sobbed. "The hospital. I have to go." This was the moment Gideon had waited for. He watched from across the room, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. This was the instability, the chaos he wanted to show the world. Donovan looked from Leona's terrified face to the expectant crowd, then to Gideon's victorious expression. He saw the trap, and in that instant he made a choice that had nothing to do with business. He turned to the stunned MC. "My apologies," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority that silenced the room. "There is a family emergency that requires my immediate attention." Ignoring the gasps, he kept his arm around Leona and guided her through the ballroom. "Walter has the car ready. We're going. Now." In the car, Donovan was a man of action. "Get Dr. Aris Thorne on a jet," he commanded into his phone, naming the world's leading pediatric pulmonologist. "I don't care what he's doing. Pay whatever it takes. I want him in Portland in 6 hours. He hung up and took Leona's hand, his grip firm and steady. "He's going to be okay," he said, not as a platitude, but as a promise. They spent the night in the sterile waiting room of the pediatric ICU. Donovan never left her side. His company was under attack, but he was at war for something else, entirely. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Aided by a remote consultation with the specialist Donovan had summoned, the local doctors had stabilized Leo. Leona sat by Leo's bed, tears of relief streaming down her face. When she finally emerged, Donovan was waiting with a cup of coffee. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "Your speech." "The board meeting." "It doesn't matter," he said simply. "Last night when you were scared, I wasn't thinking about my company. I wasn't thinking about the contract. Nothing else mattered." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. It was their contract. Slowly, deliberately, he tore it in half, then in half again. "The deal is over, Leona," he said softly. Her heart plummeted. "But," he continued, taking a step closer, "I have a new offer. One with no expiration date and no exit clauses. Stay with me. Not as my hired fiancée, but as Leona. Let's build something real from this lie we started." Tears filled her eyes. born not of fear, but of a hope so bright it almost hurt. The contract had been a script, but they had thrown it away to write their own story. "Yes," she whispered, a real smile spreading across her face. "Okay. Yes." The next morning, Donovan Knight walked into his board meeting alone. Gideon presented his case, speaking of instability and questionable judgment. When he finished, Donovan didn't refute the details. Instead, he said, "You see our beginning as a transaction, a weakness. I see it as my greatest strength. It brought a woman of incredible integrity and courage into my life. She has reminded me what it means to fight for family. Last night her brother was ill, and I left the most important event of my corporate year to be with her. Because that, gentlemen, is what stability really is. It isn't stock prices. It's about having someone to fight for, and I will always fight for them." He had won, not with corporate maneuvering, but with the simple, unassailable truth. He kept his company, but as he walked out of that room, he knew he had gained something infinitely more valuable. In the end, it wasn't the money or the contract that changed their lives. It was a single act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday night. It was the shared, silent understanding of two people who knew what it felt like to be drowning. Leona didn't just help a drunk billionaire to his car, she guided a lost man back to his heart. And in return, he didn't just offer her a solution, he offered her a future she never dared to dream of. Their story began as a lie, a carefully crafted performance for the world. But it became a testament to the fact that sometimes the most real and beautiful things in life are born from the most unexpected and broken beginnings. They found their truth not in a contract, but in the unwritten clause of the human heart that simply says, "I'm here. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a story of hope, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales that explore the depths of the human experience. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below,